My favorite leadership podcast. Hi, this is Coach Jim Johnson. How often do you listen to podcasts? Because I've become a podcast junkie. If you haven't checked out our podcast, Limitless Leadership Lounge, do so now. We just hit over a 1-year mark and have produced over 50 episodes on leadership and many other topics for emerging leaders. I also listen to quite a bit of other podcasts and consider myself somewhat of a podcast junkie. This week in this video, I will give you some of my favorites and group them into 3 categories. Number 1 is the podcast that I listen to and would love to be a guest on. Wink, wink. Number 2, podcasts I've been a guest on or they've been a guest on ours. And 3, podcasts with local flavor, the Rochester, New York. Number 1, podcasts I listen to and would love to be a guest on. The first one is one of my favorites, the Ed Milet Show. Check it out. He has a great interview format. Another one is the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast. Andy's a big pastor down in Atlanta. The third one, another great one, is The School of Greatness by Lewis Howes. The fourth one is called Business Made Simple by Donald Miller. My next one is the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast, one of the great leadership gurus, John Maxwell. Next one is another pastor. His name is Craig Groeschel, and he has a leadership podcast that's outstanding. Up next is the Table Group Podcast by Patrick Lencioni. He's coming out with a new book soon. Next one is my good friend, the Corporate Competitor Podcast by Don Yeager. Another one that I listen to is How I Built This by Guy Raz. Another one I really like is the Learning Leadership Show by Ryan Hawk. One I listen to every morning is Darren Hardy's Darren Daily. Another one I listen to every morning is the Daily Mastery Podcast by Robin Sharma. Another one I listen to quite often is The Brendan Show with Brendan Burchard. And another guy that I really like is the Dean Graziosi Show, of course, with Dean Graziosi. And then another one is the Entree Leadership Podcast, which is hosted by George Kamel and is Dave Ramsey, one of his podcasts. Podcasts that I've either been a guest on or they've been a guest on ours. The first one is Leaning into Leadership by Darren Papard, a former educational superintendent. The next one is the Teamwork Advantage by Greg Gregory. Third one is called The Council Culture by Eric Brooker. The next one is my good friend, The Trusted Leader Show by David Horsinger. And another one that we've had as a guest, although I haven't been a guest on his show, is called Raise Your Game Show by Alan Stein Jr. Another one pretty neat show that I've been a guest on is The Bo Knows Who is Changing the World by Chris Jones. Next one is the People Progressing Podcast by Joe White, another former coach. And then I've been on the Principal Leadership Lab, which hosts are Jeff Prickett and Adam DeWitt. They've also been on our podcast. And then podcasts with local flavor that I've been a guest on. First off is Normal Lies by Linda Healer. She's also been a guest on our podcast. Another one is Real Business Connections by Ben Albert, and Ben has also been on our podcast. Then there's the Gonzo Experience by David Mamano, a local entrepreneur in Rochester. He's been a guest on ours as well. And then you got your Personal Growth, Personal Brand by Andrew Biernat. And then Time Out with Your Leaders by Kevin Rusticci and Tyler White. I haven't been on their show, but Kevin has been on our show. So those are some of my favorite podcasts, both globally and locally. Check them out. And I'm telling you, I've learned a lot from podcasts, and you can too.